Okay, hopefully, is this working better? Yes. Okay, great. I have audio. I don't know why at this every time I start one of these videos, my microphone just doesn't work. But I just have to completely restart it, and it does. So, welcome to version 3 of our Noughts and Crosses app. Last version, we created this player class. Actually, let's have a look at our release notes and check what we did last version. So in the last version, we created the stats area, we created the player class, and we linked the stats area and the player class together, which is all fantastic. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to get some gameplay. So if we run our code at the moment, hopefully we should have an output that looks a little bit like this. Okay, fantastic. So we got the stats area working last time, and we've got our board here. Now, one of the things that is not so great is just how tight everything's kind of packed in here. One thing I do want to do is maybe just make these buttons a little bit smaller before we get started on the actual gameplay. And another thing I'd like to do is give a little bit of a margin down the side so that everything's not just tight up against the sides. So we're going to start by doing that, and then we're going to actually make it a playable game, or let's go some way to making it a playable game. In my to-do list, that was next, add player turns, and that's what we're going to do today. But let's just add this in. So where do we, in game board, we make our buttons, don't we? We make a space, yeah, and we give them the space a size. Here we go. So in gameboard.py, we're going to say self.size, and we're going to drop it down to like 8. And because we've set everything relative to that, it should just work. And so if we run this, okay, they're a little bit smaller, which is great. You can see that's kind of thrown this off a little bit. We can worry about positioning and that. If you don't want to make them smaller, fine. But I'm just going to make them a little bit smaller. What we're also going to do is add in a bit of a margin. So if we go to our main.py file, okay, we're going to come down to here where we make our stats area and we make our game board. And what are we passing in here? Well, we're passing in the row that each of these are working on, right? So if we go to our stats area here, we can see that we're being given the row, and then we're telling it what row to go into. When we put the grid in, we say go to self.row. Now, what would also be nice is if we could change the column as well, because actually it'd be quite nice to have a column of blank space either side of the stats area and the game board, just so that there's a little bit of space. So we're just going to refactor this slightly. And in our stats area, instead of being given a row, we're going to give a position. Okay, I'm going to, let's say position. And a position is going to be a row and then a column. Okay, it's just going to be an array with 2 values in it, the row number and the column number. And so we are going to say self.position equals position for our stats area. Okay, and then down here, instead of saying self.row when we put it in the grid, we are going to say self.position at position, why have I called it position? At index 0, okay? And then we're going to say column equals self.position at index 1. And now all we have to do is when we create our stats area, or when we create our class stats area, when we make a brand new stats area, we need to give it a position rather than just a row number, right? So down here, at the moment, when we say stats area equals stats area, instead of giving it 0 for row 0, we're actually going to give it an array with 0 as its row, and we're going to give it 1 as its column, okay? Because we want it to start in column 1 so that we can put some white space in column 0. And we're going to do the same with game board. Okay, so here we're going to make it an array. So we're going to say you're going to be in row 1, column 1, and we're going to go over to our gameboard.py file, and we are going to change our game board. Instead of accepting a row, we're also going to give it a position, and we are going to say self.position equals position. Look at this development. It wasn't perfect. It's not going to be perfect. It's just going to get a little bit better each time and a little bit cleverer until it's something we're really proud of. So here, our row down here, when we create the board, when we say self.board.grid, we're going to say, instead of self.row, we're going to say self.position. And our row is always at position 0. I've invented that convention, but we're going to stick to it. And we're going to say our column equals row itself dot position at index 1. Okay, and so that position is going to get passed in. It's going to be an array with 2 values in it. First thing in that array is our row. Second thing, but technically at index 1 is our column. Okay, and so now from our main.py code, we can change the positioning of where they sit by just editing the numbers in this array. And so if we need to play around with the format later, it will be a much easier task to do. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to add in a little bit of space, right? So we're going to pop in a frame here. So I'm going to say frame equals, do I want a frame? I want a label probably. We'll just put in a label with some blank space. So we will say down here, we don't even need to store it in a variable. We're going to say tk.label. This is such a small thing, and I apologize for starting on such a small thing, but it's one of those things where like it'll just make the app look a lot better. I don't know why it's gone. Hello, internet. So we're going to give our label, its parent is going to be the window. And we are going to give the text of just an empty string. So it's going to say text equals an empty string. And we're going to put that into the grid. So we're going to say dot grid, and we're going to put that in row 0 and column 0. Okay, and that should push everything over. What we want to do is put a couple of spaces in here. So I'm going to put a space character in a string here, and I'm going to put multiplied by, and then maybe we'll make a variable and call it margin size. Margin size. And let's just make that variable up here. So let's say margin size equals 3. Okay, so we'll get 3 spaces by multiplying that string with a space in it by margin size. I would really appreciate it if repl.it actually ran this code. I know I do quite like to spend ages and ages not running my code, but it is nice to have the option. Okay, let's run. Let's have a look. How's that worked? Yeah, so now you can see there's a little bit of space on the left-hand side here, and that's really nice. Now we're going to do the same for the right-hand side, and then we'll clean up this stats area as well. The stats area is going over 4 columns, whereas our board is going over 3 columns, which is making it look a bit wacky. But we can fix that. That's okay. That's not a problem. But let's just put in that margin so that these 3 dots after waiting, they've got a little bit of a buffer. So we're going to do exactly the same. Let me just let me just close this down and let me bring this back in a little bit. Lovely. So we're going to do exactly the same as we did with that label, and we're just going to add another label. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to do this. And instead of putting it in column 0, I'm going to put it in column 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to put it in column 5. It's going to be exactly the same margin size. Okay, it's going to be like a nice equally spaced thing. And so all I've done is change the column number there. And if I run this again, we can see now there's a little bit of space between those 3 dots and the edge. And if I wanted to, I could change margin size to like 10 and run this, and instantly I've got a lot more space in my app, right? So we can kind of dial that in and think about that. But that's great. Okay. So this main file now is a little bit cluttered. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to create 2 files, one called player with a lowercase p.py and one called stats area. And I think you might be able to see where I'm going with this. Stats area.py. And we're going to go into main. We're going to take our whole class of player and we're going to cut that, and we're going to go into player.py and we're just going to paste it in there. Okay, that's where our player class is going to live. And then we're going to do the same with stats area. So we're going to take our whole class of stats area, we're going to cut that, and we're going to come into stats area.py, and we're just going to paste it there. Now we don't actually need the player class in our stats area class, so the only thing we need to import in here is tkinter. So we're going to say import tkinter as tk. I should really know why it's called tkinter. I don't know why it's called tkinter. And we're going to go into the player. That will also, we'll also need to import tkinter into here as tk. We could keep this all in one file, and that's absolutely fine, but just for kind of clarity, it's just easier to kind of separate these things at this stage. So that's all good. Fantastic. So now in main, it's going to complain at me that it doesn't know what a player is and it doesn't know what a stats area is. So just like we did for game board, we're going to say import player, and oh no, we're going to import player, and we're going to import stats area. Oh, stats area. Now this means that we will have to say, like I've said, import player. So I've imported the player module, but there's inside the player module, there's a player class. So this means if I want to use this, I'm going to have to say player dot player, right? Now, to avoid having to do this, what I can do is I can say from player, so from lower class player, import the class player. Okay, and what that's going to do is it's just going to import that single thing from that module. So there's nothing else in this file. Okay, so it will import that class, and that's fine because we only want that class from that file. And I'm going to do the same with stats area. I'm going to say from stats area, I want to import stats area, okay, that class. And so it's just going to take that class and it's going to allow me to use it here. So now I don't have to say stats area dot something or other, like I do with game boards. Like here, I've imported game board and I've had to say gameboard dot gameboard. I don't know whether I can do this with game board because I've got like space and things in here. I don't know whether that will cause any issues, so I've just left it. But you could play with that and see if it works. Now, I should just be able to do this and run it, and it should just still work. And it does still work, which is great. Fantastic. So we've cleaned up our code a little bit, and it looks quite nice, right? On the top here, on the surface, we make our window, we make our two players, we add them to an array, we add some margins here, and then we make our stats area, we make our game board, and then we start the window. Now, I think it's about time we made a class for our actual application, okay? And this will really help us manage all of the different game events. So we're going to say class noughts and crosses. Okay, this is going to be the big class that does all the things. Okay, it's gonna do everything. It's going to be a real hero of a class. And when we make the class, we're going to define our initialize function with the self. And we are going to essentially just kind of pop a lot of this code inside our noughts and crosses class here. So when we initialize, we want to get a window to start with. Let's bring this up a little bit. And we're going to give that window a title. Now, we don't just want a window that just kind of exists and then stops existing. We want to tie it into this class. We want to store its state. And so to do that, we're going to say self.window equals tk.tk. And then when we refer to it on this line here, window.title, we need to say self.window.title. We're also going to store the margin size. So we're going to say self.margin size equals 10. And then down here, where it says text equals times margin size, we need to update that to self.margin size and self.margin size. Okay. Now, these two labels here actually add in margins. And so let's make a function, or a method, because we're working in a class. Let's make a method called add margins, okay, using a lower camel case here. And I am going to add margins using the self, of course, and we're going to paste that in there. So when we add margins, we add in two labels. Let's just hide everything for now. That's it. Lovely. We're going to add in two labels, and we're going to add the window, and our text is going to be equal to a space times self.margin size. Now, hopefully, you've noticed that here, the window, that's causing a bit of an error because it no longer exists. We now have a self.window. So we're going to say, actually, self.window and self.window. And that will make this very happy. Which is great. Now what we need is the players. So we're going to make a function called create players. A method, sorry. It's a method when it's in a class. And we are going to say player 1 equals player X Alice, player 2 equals player naught, and then naught is in 0, 0, right? And then players equals player 1, player 2. Now we want to, instead of storing players as an array that just gets lost, we want to tie this to the actual application. So we're going to say self.players equals an empty array. And then when we create players, we're going to update that empty array. We're going to say self.players equals this array with player 1 and player 2 inside it. Okay, fantastic. So now what we're going to do is we maybe make a method called def create game window. Okay. And to create the game window, what we do is we create a stats area, we create a game board, and we also add our margins, right? So we're going to say self. Maybe we can do that at the end. So we do them. Does it matter which way we do it? It doesn't. It doesn't. Let's just do it at the start. Why not? Self.add. It's always the little decisions that really throw me off when I'm programming. Okay, so we're going to say self.add margins. We'll add the margins to this, and I put this in its own function just because these lines of code are just really bulky, and it's just kind of like coming back to it later. It's kind of like, what did this do? Whereas if we just give it a name, it's like, oh yeah, this adds the margins. This is great. It's like commenting without having to add a comment. So now we need to store the stats area and the game board. So up here, we're just going to remind ourselves that the stats area and the game board exist by saying self.stats. Remember, it's a variable, so stats area equals. I don't know, let's just do an empty string. Okay, it doesn't really equal anything to begin with. And self.game board equals an empty string. And then down here, when we create the game window, we're going to say self.stats area, self.gameboards, and we're going to make those things an actual reality. And we can see here, again, it's kind of throwing an error here because we've got just window and we've got players. But they don't actually exist. So we're going to have self.window on here, and we're going to have self.players over here. Now, in order for us to give it players, we need to, before we make the stats area, we actually need to create the players. So we're going to say self.create players. Oh dear, it'd help if I could type self.create players. Now, when we create the players, it would be nice to be able to actually give the actual player names that people have typed in, and we're going to get round to that. We'll have a screen for it where people can type their names in and stuff. But what I'm most interested in right now is when I click a button, what happens? Because at the moment, nothing happens. And I want to change that and make it, okay, something does happen and X appears. Okay, but I want to change that so that it's an X, and then it's a 0, and then it's a naught, and then it's an X, and then it's a naught. And these symbols, these statuses are updating as well, right? So it's telling us whose turn it is at what point. So this is our game class now. So this is where a lot of the stuff will be happening. Now we've also got this window.main loop function that we need to do something with. So we're going to come down here and we're going to have a def start. Okay, we're just going to make a method called start. And that's going to be the self. And when we first begin the application, the very start, we're going to run this. And it's not window, it's self.window.main loop. Okay, there'll be some other code that we'll kind of put here to initialize things. But at the beginning, that's kind of it. So we've locked all of this code up now nicely in this class. And I don't know about you, but I think that it looks so much nicer and cleaner and clearer like this than we had it just 5 minutes ago. And the actual code for our program will be this. I will call it app equals noughts and crosses. And then I'm going to say app.start. Okay, so we'll make a brand new noughts and crosses class. It will initialize itself. and then we'll say start, and it will start, and that'll be great. Now, what we want to do temporarily, eventually we'll have a button that we press that will like make this create game window thing happen. But right now, we just want it to create the game window right off the bat. So down here, we're going to say self.create game window. If we don't do that, and let me just comment this out. If we don't do that and I run this now, we'll just have an empty window. There we go. We've got nothing in it. So we can see that it's made the window. It's given it a title. It's set the margin sizes. Great. It's got all of this. And then we just don't do anything apart from start, which just runs the main loop. What we need to do is we need to, when we first initialize, we need to create that game window so that we can actually start testing this. And now when I run it, we're back to kind of where we should be. Okay, so we're going to write two methods for gameplay here. We want a function that will change the turn and a function that is run when there is a next turn. So I will explain the difference between those. So when we change turn, all we want to do is we want to see whose current turn it is and make it the other person's turn, right? So if it's X, then we change it, or if it's a cross, then we change it to a naught. If it's a naught, then we change it to a cross. And that's all change turn is going to do. We're going to give it the self, of course. We must remember the self. And we need a variable or a property of this class to keep track of whose current turn it is. So we're going to make that. We're going to say somewhere in here, here's good enough. We'll say self.currentTurn. And we'll set it equal to X, okay? You can set it to naught if you want to. It's noughts and crosses. Maybe it should be a naught. Let's do noughts go first. Why not? You could come up with a function that, like, when you initialize, it picks one randomly. But does it matter? I don't know. It'd be quite interesting to do. Maybe if we have time. So if we change turn, we're going to ask a question. If self.currentTurn is equal to a naught, then we're going to say self.currentTurn is equal to an X. Oh, excuse me. Okay, so we're changing the turn. So if our current turn is a naught, then we change it to an X. Otherwise, else, well, if it's not a naught, then it's an X. So then we'll change it to a naught. So we'll say self.currentTurn is equal to a naught. Fantastic. So we can run this and it will change whose current turn this is on. Okay, great. So now we're going to make our next turn function. So we're going to say def next turn. And this is what's going to happen. Once someone clicks the button, we're going to check to see whether they've won or not. And if no one's won yet, then we're going to say, okay, do the next turn. So our next turn, well, what do we need to do in order to make it the next turn? Well, we need to change the turn. So we're going to say self.changeTurn. And then what we need to do is we need to swap the statuses of the players who are there, right? So we need to, maybe we could write a method for our players. That would be clever. So let's go into our player file. Okay, and we can see here we've got a set status. Yeah. So I'm going to make another method that's very similar to this called change status or flip status. Flip status, change status. Doesn't matter. Either one is fine. Change status. Okay. And what this is going to do is it's going to do much the same as what we just did with the noughts and crosses, right? So if the status is currently waiting, then we're going to change it to my turn. And if it's not waiting, if it's my turn, then we're going to change it to waiting. Fairly straightforward. So we're going to say if, I guess what we should also do is maybe make a get status. Let's do that. So let's say def get status. Let's always remember the self. And I'm just going to copy this from set status because we just need to literally change one thing. So we're going to say self.stats status.get. and we're going to take the status out of the brackets. Okay, I feel like I've said status a lot, and I apologize. So we're saying get status, and we're going to return self.stats status.get. Okay, so then we can say status equals self.get status. And then we're going to say if status is equal to waiting, then we are going to say self.set status to my turn. Make sense? Okay, so we're changing the status. Else, if it's not set to waiting, then it must be set to my turn. We're going to set it back to waiting. So we're going to say self.set status to waiting. Now we could be thoughtful and store these in variables, or maybe a property of the player. In fact, that's probably not a bad idea. Let's do self.waiting equals, because we might want to format it differently. We might want it to look differently. I might mistype it somewhere. So we're just going to put, this is much cleverer. This is much, much cleverer. So I'm going to say self.waiting equals waiting ... Let's call it waiting text, just so it's really clear. Okay, and then I'm going to say self.turn text equals my turn. And now whenever I reference these strings, I can actually just use the property name, the variable name. Okay, so I'm going to take this self.waiting text, and can you see here, at the very start, when we first make our player, we set them both to waiting. You can see here in the thing, I've set them both to waiting. When we set the status, we're going to say set status to self.waiting text. And this means I only have to update it here, and it will update everywhere. I can already see the problems that might arise down the road if we don't do this. So I'm going to say self.waiting text here, and I'm going to replace this waiting with self.waiting text. And then self.set status here, I'm going to set status to self.turn text. So turn text. Okay, lovely. So we've got three things that can help us with the status of the player, right? We can set the status, we can get it to see what it is currently, and we can also just tell it to change. Like if you're one status, make it the other one. Okay. So we can see here if the statuses are waiting text, we're going to set the status to our turn text. Otherwise, if it's not our waiting text, we're going to set it to our waiting text. And that's really nice. That's great. Fantastic. So now what we can do is we can loop through our players. So why is this? Oh, right, I didn't put self in. So I'm going back to main, back to my noughts and crosses class here. And in next turn, I'm going to say self in these brackets to make sure that we don't forget the self. And we are going to say for player in self.players, we're going to say player dot change status. Okay, so the player whose turn it currently is going to become waiting, and the player who's waiting is gonna be their turn. Okay, fantastic. Once that is done, we're pretty much there. So we just need to tie off a few little things here. So we've got our next turn, we've got our change turn. Now what we want to do is we want to tie an event to when we click a button. Okay, so every time we click a button, the current event is just change this to X. But that's not very good. If we have a look at the game board here and look at the space, we're telling it that its command is self.set contents, and set contents just sets the contents to X. That's not very good. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this, and we're going to set contents. We're going to be given a symbol, okay, to be set to, and then we're going to say self.contents.set symbol. Okay. Now, the command itself, we need to change as well. So if we go back to our game board here, we need an event. We need to program an event so that when the button is clicked, there are some things that happen, right? We need to, we will need to go to the next turn. We'll also need to check the victory condition and put a load of logic in for whether the person has won or not, and all of that good stuff. So let's do a function, a method here called in the noughts and crosses class called def clicked. Okay, and this is what's going to happen if the button is clicked. So if the button is clicked, we need to check the victory condition. Okay, because we don't want the next player to have their turn. The game is over. If someone's won, if they've put 3 in a row, the game's over. And so we don't want to be like, oh, it's your turn, because it's not. We want to change the statuses and we want to do all of that. So we need to check the victory condition first. Before we do that, we need to actually render something to the screen, don't we? We need to change the actual what's in that button to what it is. And so when we are clicked, we're going to pass in the self, and we are also going to give it the button that was clicked. Okay. Now, when we create the game board, okay, we give it the window. What we also want to do is we want to give it this application, this class, because what we want is we want the button to be able to set its method to being clicked. So what we're going to do is when we create this, when we create the game board, we should be able to say self.gameboard dot, and what do we call it in the game board? What's our button called? Okay, yeah, when we create the board. Okay, let's do it a different way. So when we create the game board, as well as passing in the window, we're also just going to pass in the self, okay? And the self will be a link back to this, this class. And so we're going to link to this class, and that means that the button will be able to access this clicked function, okay? Check it out. So if we go to the game board, we're passing in the first thing, we're passing in the self, which refers to this noughts and crosses class, okay? So the game board now has a copy of that noughts and crosses class. And so we're going to maybe call this noughts, let's just call it application. Okay, so we give it our application, our noughts and crosses class. And then when we create the board, we give it the window, and we're also going to give it our application. I'm going to put it first just because in my mind, the application is bigger than the window because it's, although the application's inside the window, I don't know. So we're going to say application window. And now what we're going to do, every time we make a space, we're going to give it that application. Okay, so we're kind of, we're passing the application to the game board. The game board is passing the application to each space that it's in, and I need to put application here as well. Wait, self, application, then window. So self, application, and window. So here, when we create the board, we're going to pass a copy of that application. We're then going to take that copy, we're going to pass it to each space that we create. And when we create a space, we're going to expect application to be passed to it. And we are going to say the command for our space is going to be, sorry, you can't, it's kind of floating out here a little bit, but I will, maybe I could change my settings actually to add some wrapping. Maybe that'll make it easier. Or actually, maybe I could be cleverer here and I could do this and I could say tk.button, parent, width, height. Let's pop it all on different lines. This will just make it easier for you to see. Okay, so it doesn't matter that there's loads of white space here. I've just kind of made these on different lines. I've misspelt this as well, width. Okay, lovely. So the command is currently self.setContents. What we're going to say is we're going to say application.clicked, and we're going to pass it this button, this self. So our application has been passed to this button, and when the button's clicked, it's going to run that clicked method that we just put in our application, and we're going to give it the button that was clicked. Does that make sense? No, it's okay if it doesn't. Oh dear. Okay, so what do we need to do? We need to do the lambda thing, right? So we're going to say lambda application.clicked, and we're going to pass in the self, meaning the self in this particular instance right here means this space, okay? And this space has a contents, and we can set the contents when we pass this in. So the clicked method, if we go back to, I really want to make it clear. I don't want you to be like, what is he going on about? So let's open this in a different tab here. Okay, so our main thing here, let's close this down. Our clicked expects to be given a button as well as a self, but that's kind of invisible, okay? But it expects to be given a button. And so we, well, a space technically. I called it a button. A space is a button, yeah. So we are passing this instance of this space to this clicked, and then we can say button.setContents, and we can set the contents with the current turn, whoever's current turn it is. So check this out. Here we go. So this is the last piece of the puzzle, and if you follow me along, I really, really grateful for it. So we're going to say button.setContents, and the symbol we're going to give it is self.current_turn, because that will be whoever's turn it currently is. So it's self.current_turn. No, pothole case, current turn. And that will change each time. Let's try it and see. Let's see if it works. Let's run this. There's no errors. That's good. So I click this. It's a 0. Okay. Check victory condition doesn't exist. So we've hit an error. So let's just, I'm just going to pencil that in. That'll be maybe a version in itself. Def check victory condition. And we're just going to return true for now. Okay, so let's run this again. Okay, I can press on it. I get a naught. Take 0, but 1 was given. Oh, giddy goats. Okay, I need to put self in the brackets here. Sorry, I'm too excited to test this. Okay, so I've just put def check victory condition self, return true, so that this will be happy. I could have just commented this line out. Whatever. I've got to write this at some point. I might as well write it now. And then we'll run this. So I click this, it's a naught. I click this, and it's a naught. Because when we click it, we're not saying next turn. So after we check the victory condition, we're then going to use this function here, this method next turn. And this method in turn is going to use the change turn function, and then it's going to change the status of the players. So everything should come together now. I've kind of worked from the top and come downwards rather than work from the bottom and gone upwards. But we should see now, if underneath check victory condition, we say self.next turn, okay, we should see that when we run this and we click this, we get a 0. Oh, okay, it's both of their turns, but that's because we have both of them set to waiting. So that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. we maybe need like a start game. Maybe we need to write a quick start game. But let's just check this out. So now it's an X, and they're both set to waiting. That's a bug. We'll sort that. And now I click on this one. It's a naught. This one, it's a cross. This one, it's a naught. This one, it's a cross. This one, it's a naught. This one, it's a cross. This one, it's a naught. Fantastic. Okay. Noughts did win the game twice. We're not checking the victory condition yet. That's fine. But you can see here that we're now flipping between each player's turn as we go through the game. And each time we click on a thing, we haven't managed to like stop the game, right? So I can like change these between each other, but that's just kind of it. So let's just make a quick function here that we can call when we start a new game. Okay, so let's, we've got our start here. We also want a start new game method. So we're going to say def start new game. Ooh. And when we start a new game, we are going to, should we do it randomly? I feel, I'm in the zone now. Let's do it. So we're going to say self dot, what we're going to say, self dot current turn. equals, and then we are going to set it equal to a. We're going to be clever about this. We're going to store both possibilities in an array. So we're going to have choices. It's as good a name as any. We're going to have choices, and we're going to. I need to put self in the brackets here. Okay, I'm getting too carried away here. Is my font big enough? Large, huge. Let's make it huge. Just so you can see clearly. So self.currentTurn equals random.choice, and we're going to take a choice of that choices array. Now, what's in that choices array? We're going to put in a naught, and we're going to put in a cross. Okay, so we're going to update who the starting player, well, who's the current turn is. When we start a new game, we're just going to randomly assign it. Okay, start new. I'm going to call this new session, right? Because we're going to have multiple games inside a single session of two players playing against each other. So these are our choices. Self.currentTurn. We're going to say random.choice choices. But we haven't imported the random library. So I'm going to scroll up to the top where I've got all my imports, and I'm going to import random. Okay, I've done this in a way that, like, the Python libraries that other people have written are up here at the top, and my libraries are down here. You can import them wherever you like. I'm just kind of keeping a little bit of separation between them, but that's just that's just me. Okay, so when we start a new session, we're going to pick who is we're gonna pick who's going first, right? And then we need to say for player in players, we need to have a look at our two players in self.players, self.players. We need to see what symbol that player is, right? And if Alice is an X, then and the current turn is an X, then we need to set her status to it's my turn. Okay, so we're going to say if player dot symbol. Do they have a symbol, or is it player dot? Oh no. Where have I stored the player in here? Player dot stats symbol. Okay, and we also have set status. Yep. Okay. Actually, we can be really clever about this because we can just say change status to one of them. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so let's go into main. So if player dot stats status. Did I? Hang on. Did I make a get status? I did, didn't I? Get status. Yeah, I should just use that. That's much easier. Okay. If player dot get status. I write these functions and then don't use them. If player dot get status is equal to self dot current turn. So if our not status, I want their symbol. Sorry, I am sorry. Okay, I was right the first time. Player dot stats symbol is equal to self dot current turn. So if they're across and the current turn is on cross, then we're going to say player dot change status. Okay, so our player is going to swap their status from waiting to my turn. And this should just work. Now, when we create the game window, we're starting a brand new session. So down here, I'm going to say self.start new session. So right at the bottom of our create game window function, we're going to start a new session. Okay, and then if we create, if we go out of that and create a new session, then we can just call this create game window function again, and it will just reset everything. It will pick a random person to go first, and off we go. Now, we should be able to run this a few times and notice that a different symbol starts each time if we don't have any errors. Let's have a look and run this. So they're both waiting. Oh no. Okay, if player.stats, have I done this right? Player stats symbol dot get. Okay, I need to get dot get players. So okay, in start new session, we can't say player dot stat symbol. We have to say player dot stat symbol dot get. Okay, so you want to get that whatever that string var is. We want to get it, and then we're going to compare it to current turn. So now, if we run this, hooray! Okay, Alice has been chosen. Okay, so it's her turn, and the moment of truth, I should be able to click on this button and an X should be put on it because it is currently Alice's turn. Hooray! And look at this, Alice is now waiting and it's now Bob's turn. Noughts, right? So I should click on this, Noughts go, and now it's Alice's turn. So now I click, boom, 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 and it is working absolutely perfectly. What an absolute delight. Okay, so we've got this idea of the turn now, okay, and it going from one to the other, and we've already laid out the logic for how the game will progress, right? We've got this clicked function where we set the contents of whoever clicks that button. So whoever's turn it was, we click that. We then check the victory condition, and actually we should probably have a variable called game over, right? Because we want to track whether the game is over or not. So we're going to, up here, just by current term, we're going to say self.gameover. And we're going to set that equal to true to begin with, okay? So the game is over at the start. And then when we actually start this new session, we're then going to say, okay, game over is false, okay, because it's kind of we're now playing the game. So as well as doing this, we're going to say start new session. I guess we should have like a reset game. Start new session. We should have def reset game. Well, let's say def new game. Not reset. It's not the right word. And when we make a new game, we're going to say self.gameover is equal to false. The game is not over. We've only just started. No one's put anything down. And when we start a new session, we're going to say self.newGame. Okay, that's the first game. And then we will put in some functionality that we can call this new game over and over again. We can wipe the board clean, and we can start again, and they can play again and again and again. Okay, so that's kind of in there, and we can come back to that and use that at a later time. Up here, we've put in our game over, and it's equal to true, and we're going to say self.gameover is equal to whatever self.check victory condition is, right? Because if we check the victory condition and someone has won, then the game is over. Okay, we finished that game, and we're going to have to either restart it or just quit, rage quit because we're angry. Okay, so only after checking that victory condition, if self.gameover is false, are we going to allow self.nextTurn to run, right? We're going to say if self.gameover is false, we're going to say, okay, next turn. Otherwise, there's no next turn to have. We're going to wait until they reset the game. Okay. We've made quite a lot of progress today. We've actually implemented player turns, which is fantastic. And you can see as I'm kind of clicking through here, because we're not checking the victory condition and stopping someone from playing after we've clicked, weird things are happening. Also, I can click on something that's already been clicked and change it, and that's not good. So we're going to have to look at that as well, and that's kind of some of the bug fixing we'll have to do. But this is quite a nice time to pause here. Next version, we will look at checking this victory condition and actually being able to be like, hey, you won the game, which will be quite nice to do. So let's just consult the release notes and lastly add in what we've managed to do today. Little and often wins the race, and this is kind of little. I was planning to do like 20, 30 minutes. It's kind of got away from me here. But we implemented, that's always a good word when you're programming. We implemented player turns. Okay, and so we now have this idea of being able to swap between the different players. We also what else did we do? Did we do anything else? Oh yeah, we added a noughts and crosses class. Implemented player. We did loads of stuff, right? It doesn't quite seem like that sums it up enough, but there was lots of things we had to do in order to implement that, and we have successfully done that. And now it should just be the kind of finishing touches. Okay, it's probably going to be a couple more versions until we have a really nice, slick noughts and crosses app. But I think this is starting to really look good. Thanks once again for dedicating some of your time out of your life to come and program with me. I hope that it's been helpful, beneficial to you. I hope you've been able to kind of stretch your programming muscles, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Until then, take care and have a good period of time till I see you next.